Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Barriers and Boundaries Resilience Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, EB, and a lot of times I like to focus on different aspects of resilience and maintaining resilience and being healthy. Some of those come from coaches and business leaders, and sometimes we have authors like we have a guest today, Michael Ramos. How you doing, Michael?
Doing pretty well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. It's been a long time, and uh, one of the things I've really been trying to capture on the show here, uh, sometimes there's ways of learning about resilience, and one of those ways is hearing stories of others who have gone through adversity and the lessons that we can learn of what it means to overcome obstacles, seeing barriers in our life, and establishing healthy boundaries. And for those who don't know, Michael has a book called The After and a veteran's notes on coming home, and some essays and some stories about your time. And I don't want to give away the story too much. I want to hear from you and allow you to have the floor here as we talk about that, and we'll just have a good conversation.
Yeah, cool, man. So thanks for having me. It's been a long time. We go pretty way back. So I wrote the book. The book just came out in 2024. Actually, I had to order some to send some people. That's like this is the copy of the book, right? For those people that's a non-classified map of Camp Pendleton, especially specifically Mateo, which is where I was stationed at for most of my time there at Pendleton. I joined 13 days, I think, before 9/11. I was married with a small child. And then my first wife at the time was like, oh my gosh, like this is like a major thing. I was like, nah, it's fine. Like, it's not like we're in a full scale conflict or anything. And then lo and behold, almost 2 weeks later, I woke up. I was in the shower getting ready to go work at the Calvary Chapel in Hesperia. I was a janitor there. My wife at the time was like, hey, you need to come take a look at this. And I was like, whoa, what a cool movie. Like, those planes look so real. She's like, that's not a movie. That's real life. Like a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And then as I walked out, I remember seeing the second plane hit the tower. And I was like, oh, this is not good. So I had already signed my contract. My recruiter, I can see his face plain as day, but he was like, no, you can't get out of your contract and go join the Marines. We're going to hang on to you. So I left. I went to boot camp October 23rd. I was on the DEP program, delayed entry. And then I ended up in the fleet at 1st Marine Division with 1st Combat Engineers, went to Iraq, made a lot of great friends. Some of those friends died. Then I kept making rank. I ended up in 1st Marine Division for a while, and then I got orders to the Naval Academy on the East Coast, and then I decided I'd had enough of this ride. I wanted off. I was also going through divorce at the time from my first wife, and got out, was going to go to school on the GI Bill because I wanted to go study foreign languages and history and apply for a commission in the Marine Corps and go back to doing what I knew.
Mm.
That lasted all of about, I don't know, maybe 6 months. By the time I was ready to go back, the OSO was like, "Yeah, we don't need people." I was so desperate that I called the reserves and was like, "Hey, just let me do this part time. Like, I want to go home." And they're like, "Yeah, no, we don't need you. So find something else to do." And I was a little bit of at a loss. And I hate to admit it, but one of my chaplains that I worked with was right. I did have a hard time when I got out. Like, I loved the military. I loved the job. I was an RP. What that means is that I was a chaplain's assistant slash bodyguard. And it sounds cool. Like, I tell civilians, I'm like, oh, that must have been a cool job. I'm like, yeah, right up until your chaplain tries to get you killed. Right up until, like, it is what it is, right? It's just a job like any other one. And I was just like, all right, cool. Well, this is just the way it is now. I'll figure something else out. And around that time, I had a hole in my schedule. My first class that I ever took at a real university was a creative writing class. And the TA at the time, her name's Allison Revis. I mentioned her in the book. I owe her a debt of gratitude, or it's her fault, depending on how you take that. She was like, "Hey, you kind of have a knack for this and a talent. Have you considered majoring in this?" I was like, "No, I'm gonna go back and be a Marine Corps officer, and maybe I'll get killed in Afghanistan or something, or I don't know, but I don't want to do, no, I'm not going to be a writer. Come on." And then right about that time was when the OSO and the active duty recruiter and the reserve recruiter were like, yeah, we don't need you. Go find something else to do. I was like, well, all right then. But I didn't know what else to do. So I was in another creative writing class the next semester. Actually, that's wrong. That all happened the second semester. I promised Allison I would take another creative writing class, and I took that other creative writing class. And I published two essays in that creative writing class as an undergraduate, which back then was almost unheard of. It was a literary magazine called The Sun. The teacher of the class had said, go to The Sun's website, They have a section called Readers Write. Look at their topics, write an essay about it, bring it to workshop. I didn't even know what workshop was, and then revise it and send it off. And so we did all that, and the Sun reached back out to me so long ago that it was actually via paper mail. Like they were like, "Hey, we really like your essay. We think this would be a great fit for us. Can we publish it? And also, we want to read it on our podcast." This was in 2011. Podcasting was still fairly in its new stages.
Yeah, yeah.
Like people were experimenting with it. So apparently there's a copy, there's somewhere in the ether somewhere, somebody reading my essay Boxes, which is in the book, but doesn't look anything like it did when I published it. So while that was happening, though, I was struggling with culture shock. I got out of the Navy, and I was a green side Navy guy, so like experiences may vary. Ship blue side and green side were were fairly different, and
So
I
you
was raised
joined the
by the
Navy and you were assigned to the Marine
yeah.
Corps.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so being assigned to the Marines and picking up rank alongside the Marines, I learned to think and lead like a Marine. Right. And so it was a little bit of an interesting culture shock. And that was part of what drove some of the difficulties at the Naval Academy. Like I was used to, as a first class petty officer, I was the same pay grade as the staff sergeant. My word was law. I was the end of it. Like that's how old I am. And then going to like a Navy command where that wasn't really how the Navy viewed Navy E6s. And I was like, yeah, this is not for me. So got out, but I got out on a Monday and I started school on a Thursday of the same week. And so now all of these folks that were my juniors that I was preparing to go to war and doing uniform inspections on and barracks inspections and training them how to be RPs and training them to go to the green side because we didn't do a whole lot of warfighting at the Naval Academy, but just preparing them for that. And all my experiences at 1st Marine Division as a battalion RP at regiment at division headquarters, got to fill in at MEF once, which was really I just got to go to Bahrain, which is cool. And the very next week, like we're all peers. And to go from a very structured society to everybody out here is just like doing their own thing, no boundaries. It was wild. Like, walking down, like used to having junior folks or young folks like, hey, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever, and saying it back and people looking at you like you're a freak because you're like talking to them. It was wild. And so like there was also a lot of stuff I didn't realize I was struggling with because when you're on the job, you don't have time to think about like what you've survived. Like you don't have time to process like some of the trainings you've been to, like the way you think about the world, the way you categorize it into threats or not threats, friends or enemies. Um, you don't think about that. Like you're just in the middle of doing the job. You got a job to do. If you start thinking like that, that's how you and your friends end up not coming home because your head's not in the game, right? And so now all of a sudden I have all this extra time and I'm going through a divorce and I don't have a job anymore and I don't have an identity anymore. What do I do? And so I struggled a lot and I faked it till I made it, right? Like I showed up to class, like I was always early because, you're early, if you're on time, you're late. So I always had extra pens. Like I did everything that the Marine Corps and the Navy taught me how to do. And that's partly what has made me so very successful. But some of the other stuff, the wartime deployment, just always being in that headspace, I wasn't doing so well. Right. I noticed I was angry all the time. My armpits were always sweaty because I was always stressed out. I wasn't PTing anymore because it was like my body was broken and I need a rest. And then I gained all this weight. So then you feel bad about yourself. It was just a lot. But I was still taking classes and learning about writing. And then I graduated from my undergraduate program in December of 2012, I think. December of 2012? No. Yeah. Anyways, a long time ago. And I was applied to the graduate school at UNC Wilmington, which is actually where I teach now. What's his name? Chris, the reporter from NBC or whatever, Chris, whatever his name is, he's got a daughter that's an actress. I remember him saying something about the war in Iraq was a waste of time and all this other stuff. And I just felt really bad. I didn't have a job. I didn't have really friends outside of other military veterans. Like I wasn't connecting with civilian people at all and I was just not doing good. And I remember at my lowest, I was very close to killing myself. I had a very large FNP 45 caliber pistol. Um, I was sitting in my red leather chair in my living room in a town called Leland. And then I was like, man, I can't shoot myself in my living room. Like my new second wife's gonna come home and see that, and she's gonna have to clean up that mess. I mean, obviously I'm not thinking straight, like she wouldn't have, but I'm like, she doesn't want to see that. I'll do this in the shower. I'll turn on the water. Like it'll be cleaner, right? Like that made sense
Mm.
to me. That's where I was at in my headspace. Um, I grabbed my cell phone for whatever reason. This was a Friday, and it was early in the morning. It was like 9:30 in the morning, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. Which is I get in the shower, and I put the pistol in my mouth. I'm thinking about it and getting ready to, and my phone rings, and I'm like, "Who's calling me now?" So like, obviously I'm angry that I'm being interrupted, but also I'm used to being on call, so I grumble a little bit. I turn off the water. I put my pistol down. I answer my phone, and it was my university. They're like, "Hey, Michael, this is it was LaVon Adams at the time," and she's like, "This is LaVon Adams at UNC Wilmington," and my heart stopped.
Mm.
And she was like, "I'm just calling to let you know that we have reviewed your applications and we think you have a lot of potential and we'd really like you to come study with us if that's interesting to you." And I was so excited. I was like, "Yeah, I'm good." She's like, "Oh, I'm not done yet." She offered me a TA-ship and extra money and tuition remission and all this other stuff. And I was just like, "Whoa, dude, I almost just blew my brains out against the wall of my shower." And because I took my phone, and now I'm here, right? And that's an essay that's in the book. And so as I started going to graduate school, I was still figuring out how to be in the after. And a lot of the books that folks write about the military generally are like, I was a Navy SEAL and they issued me my agent right out of Buds, and now I'm done with my missions. And here's my book. Here's 10 leadership principles from a Navy SEAL. And no
Yeah.
shade, like great on them, right? Like
Yeah.
now Army SF dudes are doing some of the same thing. And it's always like, oh, military leadership principles, or oh, here's my memoir about my time at boot camp and on a combat tour or multiple combat tours. And it's usually only one chapter that would be like, and then I got out and then I went home and that's the end of it. Because for those writers, they were trying to process the wartime stuff for them. I was still trying to process that stuff too, but I was more trying to figure out how to survive out here. Like I was angry all the time. I knew stuff wasn't right. And I was like, my friends didn't die for this. Like this is not a good, abundant life that we used to talk about earning in some field over a cigarette, right? When we got home, we thought we were going to like live it up and life was going to be beautiful, and life was not beautiful for me. And as a writer, you think a lot. And so I just started thinking a lot about like what it meant to come home, and being told what I was supposed to think about the war and how messed up I was supposed to be and incapable of doing anything. Like people would say like, "Oh, you're not like most military veterans I know, or what I would imagine a military veteran would be." And I'm like, because I can put a sentence together, like I don't know what
What
that
does
means.
that even mean?
Like I remember people telling me like, "Oh yeah," like I had a classmate, and she was excited to introduce me to her dad, and she had to go do something, and she left me with her dad. And as soon as her back was turned and she was out of earshot, he's like, "I was against the war in Iraq." I'm like, "I don't care. Thanks. Nice to meet you. My name's Michael. Who are you again?" I was like, Why do you think I need to know that? I wasn't a decision maker. I'm not the one that said, "Hey, let's go to war in Iraq." I was just the little pawn doing his job. I was like, I don't really care what you think or what you feel." And that kind of just started irking me that civilians thought that they could just talk to us any old way, like it was our fault. It's like, no, that's not how that's going to work. And but I also had a lot of positive experiences too, right? And thinking about like professors that reached out to me and helped me and valued my stories and valued, like, I had one professor who was telling me that even though she was anti war, my work reminded her that people that fought the war were people just like her sister who was on active duty. And I think maybe just retired or retired a few years ago, like 30, 35 years maybe. She's like, "You're putting a human face to this conflict, and you're reminding us that there's actually a cost. It isn't just about whether a political party decided to make a decision or whatever." She's like, "And I know you're not interested in that." She's like, "But you're actually making it about real people." I'm like, "Well, yeah, like these were my friends and now some of them are dead and now I have to figure out what to do with that." And so a lot of it so a lot of the writing was just about coming home and figuring out what it meant and just observing the way people treated me, things that they would say to me. Like I feel like sometimes um in the early stages, I would feel that people would get really out of pocket and would say things to veterans that you wouldn't say to any other subculture in the United States, right? And which reminds me of that James Baldwin quote, which I'm going to butcher, so it's not really a quote so much as a paraphrase. But like, you think that your suffering is new to you until you read, and then you're like, oh, actually, people are going to people, and they're just going to be rude to you because that's just the way people are, right? It's not because I'm a veteran. They're not special. They're not being especially mean to me because I'm a veteran. It's just because I happen to be standing there and maybe it was a Tuesday, or
Yep.
they were. being insensitive because it was a Tuesday. They could have been just as insensitive on Thursday about me being Hispanic in North Carolina, right? Like you never know. Once you
I've
start,
always leaned into the quote of hurt people hurt people. They're projecting something in their own lives, and you just happen to be the one standing there.
yeah, and I also talk a lot about like some of the physical stuff, like being in restaurants. Like part of the erosion of my first marriage, I think, was coming home and not knowing. And part of it, as an RP, you're a caregiver, so you don't have time if you're doing your job well. And chaplains are the same. Then you don't have time to focus on your hurts because you know that there's Marines and corpsmen around you. They're on the line every day. Like, yeah, okay, I got shot at a couple times. I got rocketed. I got mortared. I even had a missile once, right? Like, I say that to a civilian and they'd be like, oh my God, that's terrible. But then I say it to somebody like one of my friends and they're like, what a weakling. Come on. My deployment was way harder than that, right? Like, and so there's all these levels, but like you think about all this stuff and it's like, there are physical symptoms. Like after when I got home, I couldn't be in loud restaurants. Like I hate it because I could hear everything. I could hear silverware on plates and clinking of glasses and everybody's conversation, and I could smell everybody's perfume and food, and it just was sensory. I didn't. Now I have the language to say that I was being overstimulated because I was still stuck in flight or flight, and that's why I was hearing everything. I didn't know that. All I know is I felt like a caged little animal, which is a tired thing. And it's not even that it's a caged animal. You just feel penned in, like everything, all the noises are on top of you. I still, even now, can't go to a restaurant that's super loud. I'll be like, yeah, it's too loud in here. I'm gone. I'll catch you guys later
Yeah.
or whatever. But like I wrote about those types of things. And then as I got up every day and learned to deal with civilians, then it wasn't dealing with civilians, it was interacting with civilians. And then it was actually having relationships with civilians. Like over time, you kind of figure it out, as I think one of the things I learned and I talk about in the book too. Like I don't actually talk about it explicitly, but as you read the book and you see how all the essays stack up and tell this narrative, you see that like at the beginning, yeah, the narrator, me, is a mess, and I'm slightly less of a mess by the end of it. Because I've had a great community. Like my colleagues here, if you would have told me going on 15 years ago that not only would I be surviving in the civilian world, but actually be thriving with like real friends that are what I would call the civilians that I would call real friends. Like there's a like that are solid colleagues that I have worked with, people that I would stack up against any one of my RPs that I worked with that were top level. Excellence doesn't know any bounds.
That's a great point to highlight as well. And one of the questions that comes out of that for me is exploring this idea where the community that you went into in the after was initially a barrier and now it's become a healthy boundary for you. So, talk me through some of that processing. What were some of the deciding factors in like, oh, this is no longer a barrier for me, but actually something I feel like is protecting?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of a lot of things. One, I would just go to class and after a while it's like after a while you just get used to certain things, like they don't bother you as much, so that was part of it, but that's like the lowest part of it. But I remember one time I was in a class with a professor and she was talking about suffering, and then I had to one up her suffering, and she just looked at me in the middle of the class and she's like, you do know that veterans don't have the monopoly on suffering, right?
Oh, goodness.
And I was like, she's right. And I that was an important moment for me. I was like, she's right. I've been an asshole. I'm that vet. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? Like, she's right. Once I started, and also when you're teaching creative writing and you're reading, the act of community is really important. We write, I mean, writing is really just a means of data transcription, right? But like what we're trying to do is communicate the human experience. It goes back to when we were Stone Age men and women gathered around a fire telling stories because there was no internet 10,000 years ago, right? It was like sun's down, time to tell a story, then we're going to bed. And we were relating those stories about the human experience being able to, and then there was another experience too where another one of my professors who's now a really great friend of mine and a colleague, he's two doors down, his name's David Gessner. He writes about nature a lot. In fact, his next book, Flacco, is about Flacco the owl. It's coming out on Thursday. I wrote an essay in the book called Sleep because I was curious about how I could sleep. Like I slept like a baby in country, but then I come home and I couldn't sleep at all. I couldn't sleep at Pendleton. I couldn't sleep at the Naval Academy. I couldn't sleep when I was a veteran. So I wrote this to figure out why I couldn't sleep. And in one of the scenes or one of the vignettes, I'm talking about how we're coming home on the bottom of Shard. This was years before it burned the hull, right? And my Marines would just come back by my coffin rack. I slept on the bottom rack because, I'm 5'6" and I was not hopping myself all the way to the top of the rack. And so my Marines knew where I lived, and they'd be like, "Hey, RP, let's go get mid-rats." I'd be like, "All right." So I'd get up and we'd go walk the ship and go to mid-rats, and they would talk to me about the things that they saw and had done, and how they were having nightmares and stuff. And David was like, "I don't know anything about this life, but like when I was in my late 20s, I was in a really bad car accident and I still have nightmares." And he was maybe in his 40s or 50s at the time when he told me this story, and he's like, and I think that's cool that we can relate over these things. And so, like, little by little, these things just started happening. I'm like, we really are just the same. Like, I volunteered for my job. Like, I asked to do this. I didn't know what that meant when I raised my hand and said, I solemnly swear, right? But I was willing to do it because I took that oath. So then I started thinking, like, okay, so maybe I need to lose this chip on my shoulder because I asked for this. Believe it. And that's not a popular thing. And that's a bitter pill that a lot of veterans need to remember. We volunteered for this. Nobody drafted us. Nobody made us. We volunteered for it. And I'm not saying that to diminish the mental load and strain because it's heavy, but we asked for it.
That puts an emphasis on processing what has happened,
Yeah.
not trying to blame something else or try to find an excuse to feel a certain way. But if you volunteer for something, you almost are volunteering yourself to address the consequences of what you volunteer for.
Yeah.
Now, granted, life's unfair.
Yeah, and so I think you're right, man. Like, and thinking as a writer like that, as an essayist, that's what I do is process this stuff, right, and figure this stuff out. And then I'm in my head a lot, for better or worse. And I started thinking about like, well, I volunteered for this, and I think too, we get out and we're so excited to be free that we forget who we are and where we've come from. Like most of us join in that window between 18 and 25 where we're still not fully people yet, which is why we recruit that age group so that we can be imprinted with these values. And so then I started thinking about the core values like honor, courage, and commitment, and service, and selflessness, and sacrifice, like all the buzzwords that are on our honor, courage, commitment cards. And we learned that JJ did type buckle, but like nobody really uses it, but we really do use it. And I thought about, then I started thinking about how like the Navy and the Marine Corps spent a lot of money on me and the rest of us to make us resilient so that we could stay in the fight. Well, we're not in a fight anymore, but we still have those skills to stay in the daily life that could be such a blessing for us if we just like get over ourselves. Like I think a lot of veterans, and I was chief among those people when I first got out, where we felt like something was owed to us, or I don't know, it could be anything, but like I just realized that this was not the way to live. Like being angry all the time at some imperceived slight that maybe didn't even happen, you can't, eventually you just get tired. And
Yeah.
you have the choice to either check out or to be like or do something different, right? And that's something that the military teaches us.
What does resilience mean in the after versus when you were in service? Has it changed much for you?
I think it's only changed what it looks like, but I think the meaning is the same. I think that resilience is being able to take the hardships that come your way, take the hard lessons that come your way, feel the feelings that you feel. Like for instance, like a couple, let's see, what's today's the 12th. So about 5 days ago, Sergeant Major Ellis was killed in Barwana, Iraq in 2007. February 7th is his anniversary.
Mm.
I was supposed to be on the deployment that he got killed on. I would have been there that day. My first wife wanted me to get out of the service. I thought that's what I wanted. Then, so I left 2-4. Craig Spear was my replacement. He went forward with John Conroe and all the guys that I loved as brothers. And that tore me up for a long time that I wasn't there. So part of the resilience is like, well, I wasn't there. It is what it is. I've got a job to do. Like I can't dwell on that. I've got other people I need to take care of. I have new chaplains I got to take care of. I've got boots I got to train. Like you learn to just bounce back from that, right? Like you learn that, okay, like, yeah, this was painful and it was hard. Got to do the job. And then you just push that away. That's part of what resilience, I think, I've heard that it's gotten a little bit better, but that's how it was explained to me back then. Now you realize that resilience for me means that those things don't cripple me. I can still feel sadness and sorrow. Is ridiculous as it might sound, I can feel guilty, but I don't have to stay there. Like I
Hmm.
have the ability to pick up my pack and keep moving. And I had it then too, right? Like I had work to do when I found out that Sergeant Major Ellis got killed. I had Marines around me. I had chaplains around me. I had work to do. And the same is true here now. Like I can't let something like that sideline me. I have students who depend on me. Like I have colleagues that depend on me. And being able, I have family. I have a wife and kids. Well, my kid's actually a grown man now, but like, so part of that is, so while I'm not dealing with the death of a senior enlisted member who was a mentor and somebody I looked up to, or a guy in my pay grade that like we were boys together, now I'm thinking, now resilience is actually still about the same thing. Like I'm now thinking about it maybe 15, 20 years later, but I'm not sidelined by it. I don't have to go out and get
Hmm.
hammered or think about killing myself anymore. I can be like, oh, I actually can write an essay about this, or I can go put my feet in the grass and then be able to show up the next day for the people who need me now. And I think a lot of that has to do with being in a really solid community.
You mentioned being okay with guilt, and I would actually agree with that. And in the sense of it's not shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've always looked at guilt as think of it in like a court of law. If you're guilty of something, it's more of just a reflection of what's true. It's
Yeah.
not to shame you, it's not to change your identity. But when you engage with survivor's guilt or something like that, I think there's a missing term in our society about survivor shame as opposed to survivor guilt.
Yeah.
And I like that you make that distinction there. I think that's it's gold.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's like, but I also learned that like I can say like, yeah, I feel bad and I feel guilty that I wasn't there, but I can't change that now. And thinking about all the ways it could have gone different, well, that will just drive you crazy. And so all I really did, to be honest, is I just went back to what I knew. It's like you don't let your mind tell you what it's going to do. Like the Marine Corps taught us, you can always go a little bit further than your brain thinks it can. So push it just a little bit harder. So, like, oh, I think I can't do this. Well, I'm going to make myself do this. All right, I can get up today and I can laugh a little. All right, I can laugh a little bit more today. All right, I can actually have a good time today. Like it'll be fine. The world's not going to end, and that doesn't mean I miss Sergeant Major or anybody else any less. It doesn't lessen the pain, but it allows me to live the life that they don't get to anymore, right? And so some of it is about honor. It's like I thought about this one time. It's like when I was at my lowest, I was like, I would be willing to bet that Sergeant Major Ellis would kick my ass if he saw who I had become and how I was behaving. And the fact
Mm.
that I thought maybe I was letting him down, and therefore the culture of the Navy and the Marine Corps down, and our history, like for me that was motivation. Other people might be like, yeah, you're a motard, whatever, but like for me that mattered. Like I believed in the ancestors and holding up that line and keeping our honor clean and all those things that are bumper stickers and catchphrases, but there's a reason for that, and it helps you
Sure.
get through it, believe it or not. It did for me anyway.
Yeah, definitely a culture of tradition, right? And
Yeah.
excellence. Sometimes that word tradition kind of gets confusing in a sense of what is the tradition? What are
Yeah.
we honoring when we say we honor the tradition? That tradition is simply living excellent. And that might look like something else in today's world versus even 20 years ago. How do we maintain excellence in the ranks, living by what you said, values that you have in place, and really reflecting on that culture? That's a beautiful way to address resilience, a beautiful way to just live out those values.
Thank you. Like I remember I was talking to this dude. It's funny, but one person once asked me if I was a motivational speaker, and I was like, "Nah, man, I'm just talking to another veteran that's struggling." Because I was talking to this veteran at the community college. I'm pointing over there, like you can see it, but it's down the street from us, like about 15 minutes maybe. And he was really struggling, and I just told him, like, "Look, man, I was like, I know where you are. I was just there. I was like, but you have to remember where you've come from. It's like you used to stand
Hmm.
head up, shoulders back, chest out, 40-inch steps, like you were proud to be alive." I was like, nothing's changed. Like you should still have that sense in you to be proud of who you are. Stand up straight, speak clearly, enunciate, sound off. Like be proud of who you are, be proud of where you've come from, and be proud of your hurts. Like I was like, the alternative is just check out. I was like, and you can do that if you want. I was like, it's your choice. I was like, but life's pretty cool, and we owe it to those dudes to take advantage of what they can't anymore. And thinking about like just recapturing that pride. And some of it I think too is when we come back, we are different. Like there's no point in saying that we're not. Like we're different than civilians. We're different than the civilian boys and women that left home or whatever circumstance to join them. Like we're different. And in our world, the military world, being different is bad, right? But it also means like you're set apart. You're something. I hate to use the word special because I don't want to give people complexes, but we have a different set of traditions. You're right. We just have a different set of traditions to hold up to. We have people that we're responsible for and accountable for, and some of those people are from 245 years ago, right?
Yeah.
250 years ago.
Yeah. I've always liked using the term team instead of family,
Yeah.
just because there's a lot of varying opinions of what family means. Some people join the military because of family situations they want to get away from. Let's say you're talking to a brand new leader, a brand new manager, just got out of college, taking that position. He has a team or she has a team that's working for them. What from your experience is your encouragement to someone who's just taking over a leadership position?
Be humble and learn from your guys. Like one of the I'm a college professor now, a tenure track professor of creative writing. Before that, I was in a different part of this building, and I was the assistant director of our publishing lab here. And I was basically a platoon sergeant. I had six graduate teaching assistants that I was responsible for, and I would tell the hypothetical college graduate, one, everybody knows you're in charge. You don't have to remind everybody. That's not a question. Like, get over it. If you act like you're not in charge, okay, that's a different ball of wax, but you don't have to say like I'm in charge. We know that. Everybody knows that. Like I never once felt the need to be like, "Hey, you need to do this because I'm telling you to because I'm the boss." I was like, "Hey man, like we need to get this done. Can you help me out or what?" Like, and part of it too is don't be afraid to get in there with your team. Like I remember when I was in Okinawa, First Sergeant Carlson was our H&S company First Sergeant. He moved over to Fox 24 the next deployment, but he was this big dude, lifelong grunt until he decided to go diamond. He had a big Suicide Charlie one tattoo on his arm, and like his forearm was huge. And I was the duty NCO. I was the sergeant of the guard, and he was like, "Don't be afraid." And I was looking at the watch bill, and I realized I didn't have enough spaces for our watch bill. He's like, "You can put yourself on there," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right." So I put myself on there a couple of times. I didn't want to go out on liberty in the Philippines. Like, let everybody else do that stuff. Like they'd earned it. And so then coming out here, working in a civilian team, like during COVID, for example, one of my teammates, I could see on Zoom that my teammates were getting fatigued, like, and another task had come down from somewhere, and we had to produce something else. And I was like, you know what, guys, never mind, forget that I just asked, I'll take it. And one of my guys, her name's Cassie Murray, we're still friends to this day, and she was like, why did you take that job from us? Like, that's what we do. And I'm like, right, but I'm the leader. That doesn't mean I'm the boss. That means I'm the servant of all. So, like, I have to be good at my job just in case you can't do it. I need to. I need to be able to step in and pitch in if you can't. I was like, because I can't keep asking you to do stuff and give more if I'm not giving anything. Right. And that's part of the team mentality. It's like we're all shouldering the burden. Like it's just the way it is. So like when you're getting out of college, lose the chip on your shoulder about being in charge. Be humble and learn from the guys that have probably been doing it a lot longer than you have, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty.
That's an excellent piece of advice to offer. Just come out the gate willing to serve, be a servant leader. And it's
Yeah.
not just a cliche, it's just what you said. Like there was your ability to be perceptive enough to know that the team needed support.
Yeah.
No one to delegate, but no one to pull back and say, let me take that one. That's really good stuff. So excited for you. The book's been out less than a year.
Yeah.
The After Veterans Notes on Coming Home. Michael, thanks for joining me today on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And just hearing that story, man, thank you so much for one, not killing yourself, man.
Yeah. I
Like
appreciate it.
that's,
Thanks.
yeah, no, I mean, just the story of going through that. I thank you for being vulnerable here with us. And hopefully that's a message for someone to pick up the phone, call somebody, reach out, get help. And I've talked about suicide on this podcast a couple of times, and man, the idea that just in that moment and just getting through that dark moment and what that could lead to where you're at now.
Yeah.
Just another example, a story of what it means to flip that. And man, I appreciate you sharing that story and writing about that story and getting it out there for others. So any final words on resilience, leadership?
I mean, just have to say yes. I mean, unless it's like a boundary thing, but generally, just we're humans, we're stuck in the space-time continuum. We can't see what's coming down the road, which is part of what creates anxiety and fear in us and makes us behave the way we do. But just like you said, like, I didn't know, like, if you would have asked me that this is where I would be so many years ago, I'd be like, absolutely not. I'll probably be dead somewhere, like, I'll be doing something else. You just you never know. And I think that's the thing that I learned is like when I was doing this with my fist because I was so angry, well, I can't get anything,
Mm,
right? But if I'm like this, my hands are open, well, then I can receive whatever the universe or God or whatever has for me that is definitely a lot more than this, right? Like, and that's whether it's leadership, like, don't be a closed fisted leader. Don't lead from email. That doesn't get anybody anywhere. Just treat people like people
yeah.
and be open to
Good word.
change and just go with it.
Yeah. How can listeners, viewers stay connected with you? How can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's RPBeals, RPBEELZ _ writes at Instagram. Or you can just Google me, Michael Ramos, writer, and it'll take you to my website and it'll say reach out and they'll send me an email. But Instagram's probably best. I generally tend to respond to people who are like, hey, I read your book or I heard you speak and it was really cool. And again, that's part of being a human being and part of a community. There's a lot of people who you talk to that are like, oh, you should reach out. But like, I've had those people and then like silence. I'm not going to do that. I mean, it might take me a minute, but
Understood. Understood. Hey, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it, and wishing you the best. And continue fighting a good fight, and we'll keep pushing for resilience here as well.
all right, man. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, my friends, that was Michael Ramos, author of The After, a veteran's notes on coming home. What a great, vulnerable, authentic story he shared with us. I was particularly drawn to this idea of him going from the community of the military to the civilian community and how it was initially a barrier and it became a healthy boundary for him. It was a highlight, and it was just one of those moments, an aha moment, an insight. And this is why I want to keep having guests on, because when we talk about resilience, when we talk about overcoming adversity, sometimes it's about turning that adversity into something positive for you that can be a healthy boundary for you. So let's keep pushing, let's keep exploring. And if you have any potential guests that you think would be great for the show, reach out, let me know, connect me with them if you can. I have a lot of guests in the queue to get to as well. I'm excited for what the next few months are going to cover. But let's keep fighting the good fight, and let's keep getting after resilience. And until next time, EB out here.